Welcome to the Brew Crew Review Podcast, the show by fans for fans of your Milwaukee Brewers. Welcome back, Brewer fans, to podcast number 58 of the Brew Crew Review. I'm your host today, Vince Travato, joined on the set by Mr. Scott Bartell. Scott, how are you today?
Doing great. Hey, everybody.
Glad to hear that you've made it tonight, Scott. We are missing our fellow co-host, Craig Mueller, who is at a family function this evening. Do we know where our other co-host, Chad Collins, might be tonight, Scotty?
I am not 100% sure. I really don't even have he didn't really give me any kind of a reason this time. He might be, I don't know, maybe possibly betting on spring training games. I'm not sure.
Sounds about right. I know that he's had a variety of excuses as to why he's not been here for the last, year of the podcast. But in any event, we're hoping he comes on one of these weeks. But, Scott, glad you could join us tonight here on the set. We're going to talk some baseball, and as our longtime listeners know, we've spent a lot of our podcast time the last month or so interviewing former Milwaukee Brewers. We've had former Brewers pitcher David Tember and former Brewers outfielder Pete Lillo as recent guests on the show. And before that, we've had author Chris Zantow, who is soon to publish a book on the Brewers. But want to get back to talking some actual Brewers baseball with you tonight here, Scott. So we're about halfway through spring training at this point, and the Brewers, I don't think the record matters so much in spring training, but obviously Craig Counsell and the team is, they're working through some questions that every team has coming into spring training, which is, who are going to be your starters, who's going to be in your rotation, who's going to be in your bullpen, who's going to make the team. From my perspective, it seems like the Brewers have less of these questions than some other clubs coming off a very successful NL Central winning 2018 season. Means that the team is pretty well solidified. We didn't really have too many losses this offseason in terms of free agency or trade outside of Broxton and Santana and others we've already discussed. But I think one area of question is the starting rotation. And, Scott, I'd love to get your thoughts on where you think the starting rotation is going to end up. We've got, 7 or 8 guys, if you count Jimmy Nelson, who are vying for the starting rotation. Obviously, it's going to be 5 spots at the end of the day. Where do you see the starting rotation shaking out as of this taping here in early March?
Well, you would think, you would really hope, I guess, that we would know at this point who it's going to be, but we really don't. And so it makes it a little bit harder to guess at this point. But having said that, I'm actually of the belief that I don't think that Jimmy Nelson is going to start the year in the rotation. I just think that we're probably going to try to limit his innings a little bit this year because he is now, over a year removed from baseball. And so, we don't want to have him pile on 200 innings when he threw 0 last year. So that's just my thought. I don't know. But it looks like right now, Jhoulys Chacín is going to wind up being our ace, I guess. And then after that, I kind of wonder what is going to happen to Chase Anderson. I think he's going to start the year in the rotation, but I think he's going to have to prove. I mean, this is a guy that was left off our roster in the playoffs, so I mean, he's got a lot to prove. And then after that, it's going to be some combination of, I guess, either Davies, Woodruff, Burns, and Peralta. And I think, well, obviously 3 of the 4 of them are going to have to make it. I'm not sure who it's going to be, but one other thing I did want to point out, unfortunately, we did have our first spring training casualty, and it was kind of a big one, actually. Bobbie Wall is out for the year after tearing his ACL. He was the guy that we just acquired with the Keon Broxton trade, and this guy,
right.
Nobody's really heard of him. But I can tell you this, the guy was a strikeout machine, power pitcher, and I thought he was going to be like kind of that unsung hero going into the year. And to lose him early, we lose some of that depth at the back end of the bullpen. Makes me wonder if potentially they could say, Woodruff or Burns, if one of you doesn't make the rotation, you're going to be at the back end of our bullpen. I guess that's possible, but I don't know. We'll see what happens.
Yeah, no, Scotty, you bring up some good points. I know in journalism school they teach you to disagree with your host just to create conversation, but I agree with most of what you said. So Wall's injury to me is a pretty big deal. I know that some others, including our colleague Tom Audricourt, were stating that they don't necessarily think that Bobbie Wall was going to make the bullpen or make the big league roster out of spring training. I tend to disagree. I think that David Stearns viewed him as being a key bullpen piece to kind of pair with some of the guys that we already have in the back end of the pen, and he profiles it as like the perfect David Stearns bullpen type of guy. So I do think his loss is a little bit much, this early on in the year. I know that Craig Counsell and others have talked about the Brewers' depth, and I think that that's a good word for the Brewers' overall game plan. But I do think this injury hurts a little bit. Now, Wall, to his credit, has talked about being able to come back in September. I don't know how likely that is medically, so we'll see about that. But I know that the Brewers can definitely not count on him for a significant portion of the season at best case scenario.
Well,
you also rate.
I was going to ask, have you ever heard of anyone, like any kind of major league player, being able to come back in the middle of a season when they sustained an ACL injury and come back that year? I mean, that's unheard of. I can only think of one off the top of my head.
Giovanni Guerra, right?
Yep.
2008. Is that the one you're thinking of? Yeah,
that's the one.
Yep. I remember that as well. Yes.
So it could happen.
You never know. Yes, exactly. But no, the chances are not good. I do think you do raise another really, really interesting point for the Brewers. We've got, what's essentially a veteran team. Again, 2018 National League Central Division winners, playoff team, postseason experience, but they're coming into the year with a lot of question marks in the rotation, including 3 young guys. So I'd love to hear your prognosis between those 3 guys, like Freddie Peralta, Brandon Woodruff, and Corbin Burnes. Now, last year, Burnes pitched out of the pen a lot. Peralta spent a chunk of the year in AAA and then another chunk in the big leagues. And then Brandon Woodruff. And just to throw it out there for discussion, if I'm Craig Counsell and I'm looking at the starting rotation, I got 5 slots to fill, and I've just had an injury in the bullpen. I'm looking at a guy like Brandon Woodruff and saying, you know what, this guy has got a lot of he's got really good stuff in terms of his velocity and, some of his raw talent. His numbers in the minor leagues were outstanding for most of his tenure in the Brewers system. And he struggled a little bit as a starter when he was brought up to the big leagues in 2017. I view a guy like Woodruff, because of his September and postseason success, is actually being a much bigger component in the bullpen than is currently being discussed by others in the media. I see Woodruff as being that kind of power arm that can pair with Knebel and Jeffers and Josh Hader and others in the back end of the bullpen to really create a formidable 6th through 9th innings for the Brewers. How do you feel about Brandon Woodruff? And then we can get to the other guys. But let's talk about Woodruff first and whether or not you see him as a starter or as a reliever going forward.
Well, I think he's the guy, if anybody, of the 3 anyway, it seems like Peralta, I guess with Peralta and Burnes probably have a leg up on him as far as being able to take over those rotation spots. Woodruff has proven to be absolutely dominant, so is Burnes for that matter, but it sounds like the plan all along was they wanted Burnes in the rotation to start this year. So I don't think that they're going to deviate from that plan, and I think Woodruff will be the guy who winds up going to the bullpen. I also want to point out that, as you were saying, we need those dominant arms there, and Woodruff proved at the end of last year that he could be that. But the other thing that we also have to look at is not only did we lose Bobbie Wall, but Jeremy Jeffers basically has been a no-show so far in spring training. Like he hasn't pitched because he's got some, shoulder ailment that we hope is nothing major. It doesn't sound like it is, but they're, taking their time with him and bringing him along a little bit gingerly, and that's fine. It's spring training. The last thing we want to do is lose another key component to the back end of that bullpen. I mean, Jeffers was absolutely dominant last year as a closer, and that's going to be hard to replace. So to be able to bring a guy like Woodruff, or to have the capability of moving a guy like Woodruff to the back end of that pen is just huge for this team.
Yeah, no, you make a lot of really good points. And I was going to bring up the Jeffers injury later on in the podcast, but let's talk about that now a little bit too. It's one of those weird things, guys like Jeffers who are power arms and they throw a lot of innings like he did last year. There's always that risk of future injury. And, if you remember correctly, 2018 ended for Jeffers in a weird fashion as well. He did pitch against the Dodgers in the NLCS, but he also had, missed a little bit of the postseason or the game 163, at least against Chicago, with some sort of weird injury as well. And I just am wondering, and he didn't pitch well against the Dodgers, if you remember the postseason last year. And I hope he's not suffering from something more serious than is being let on. And, right now the team is just saying shoulder discomfort, something very general, something very broad, but it happened so early on in his spring that it would be weird that it would have happened, without, much game action. So I'm just kind of wondering what's going on with Jeffers, and if this isn't more serious, then maybe the team is letting on. I sure hope that I'm wrong and just, speculating about nothing right now.
Yeah, I think that it's easy to come to that conclusion, and I think that if last year's struggles and the sort of mystery injury along with this year's shoulder injury, if the two of those are indeed the same injury or correlated in any way, then we should all be really worried, because that is bad. I'm hoping that it's completely unrelated, and that, we're going to talk about this next week and he's going to be out there striking people out like he always does. And we'll just be like, oh, yeah, remember when we were worried about Jeffers, and it's not going to be a big deal. But for now anyway, I definitely a cause for concern.
Yeah, and I think especially because of his pitching style. Again, he's a power guy. He strikes out a lot of batters. He throws hard. He's a guy that comes in and, God, last year he was so dominant when he pitched out of the back end of the bullpen and was able to step in for Knebel for a time when, Corey struggled for a couple months in July and August. And I just hope, again, that we're overanalyzing this. It's nothing serious. The Brewers are just being careful with the guy in spring training because these games don't matter. And, Jeffers is going to be able to regain his role at the back end of that pen in such a dominant way like he did last season. But you're right. Time will tell. Hopefully, again, you're correct in saying that next week we're going to be laughing about this, or not worried about it at least, and that it's nothing. But I think in the short term at least, it is cause for a little bit of concern. Corey Knebel had an up and down year last year, so we're counting on him this year to be a really big part of our bullpen. I think he's certainly got the talent to do so, but you always want to have those pieces. Because if Jeffers is out and Knebel's a little up and down, we're one injury away to Josh Hader to having a ton of question marks in the back in that pen. So we really need to make sure that these guys are as healthy as possible. And, it's oversimplifying it and goes without saying, but, injuries can really make or break your season. And because the Brewers rely so much on their bullpen, unlike some other teams that have a really good starting rotation and, kind of use a bullpen in a more traditional fashion, the Brewers are designed to have a great pen and to not rely on their starters as much as other teams do. So I think it would be especially bad for a team like Milwaukee.
Yeah, and when you look at it's so funny because this year, like we, have these like little debates that make absolutely no sense. Like, oh, are we going to get a Dallas Keuchel, or are we going to go after Craig Kimbrell, or which one would you rather have on this team? And Dallas is a good 2 or 3 maybe starter. Like he's good. That's awesome. I don't necessarily want to pay a lot of money for him. And Kimbrell is an absolutely dominant reliever. And it's like, which one is more value? Because Dallas is going to give you twice as many innings, but Kimbrell is going to be a lot more dominant. And like when you look at, I guess, what we accomplished last year, we did it basically without an ace. We had a bunch of like, I guess I'll just say average starters. I mean, nobody was absolutely phenomenal. I mean, Miley was very good. Chastain was very, very good also. Like, they did great. Miley's gone now. Yeah. And we're like, hey, this is the way we're set up. We don't need an ace. We don't even need, like, pitchers to go deep into games. Like, it just doesn't matter. We're going to have this dominant bullpen, and they're going to take care of it too. And that's how our pitching is going to work. And it obviously worked incredibly well last year. So we have to, I guess, kind of hope that it works again this year.
Right. And I know that we lost Craig's favorite, Wade Miley, but, so we're looking at the guys that are currently there. And like I said, it's 8 guys vying for 5 spots right now. So, Zach Davies had a injury-filled up and down year last year. Chase Anderson was not nearly as good in 2018 as he was in 2017. So he's a bit of a wild card. We've got 3 young guys. And then we've got Josh Tomlin. Some have speculated that Josh Tomlin is sort of like this year's Wade Miley, a veteran who's brought in on a short-term contract that might be able to fit in well in Milwaukee. What do you see Josh Tomlin's role, if any, being on the 2019 Brewers?
I think right now he's just a good depth piece. I should probably actually look at his contract and see if anything's guaranteed. I thought he doesn't have to be on the major league roster, does he? I mean, I don't know. He's a veteran, though. I should probably know this.
I think so. I don't think that there – well, have your intern, Clarissa, look that up. I don't think that there was anything in his contract that stipulated that he had to be in the major leagues by a certain day. I could be wrong on that. Maybe there was an opt-out clause by – a lot of those veteran guys, it's like May 1st, there's an opt-out clause, but I don't really know. So if Tomlin, has that in his contract, I guess I wouldn't even view that as being a huge factor one way or the other. If he's performing well, he's going to pitch. If he's not, he's going to be in AAA or gone. So I don't view that as necessarily being a huge deal either way. He did have a pretty rough debut in spring training. He gave up, I think, 3 home runs and the first inning and a half of work that he had, but he did settle down. And then his last outing, he actually pitched fairly well. So he had a rough year with Cleveland last year, but he does have a track record of success. I'm just wondering if you think that maybe Tomlin might have a role on this team, going forward.
So it was indeed a minor league contract. He did get an invite to spring training, obviously, but I just think that this is something that Stearns does very well, and that's that he gets those depth pieces and makes it so that if people are hurt or something happens, that we have a capable, ready backup that's going to be able to step in. And I think that that's happened too many times, I guess, in the past with the Brewers where we just, unfortunately just didn't have the depth. And I think that he's really made that focal point to his tenure here, and it's worked out incredibly well.
Right. Well, and that certainly was the case last year with Miley, and he's done that with a few other guys. And one guy that he did that with that is still around is Junior Guerra. What do you see as Junior Guerra's role on the 2019 team?
I think that Guerra is in all likelihood going to be – now this is really funny because I think, he's going to be the long man. Did the Brewers really even have a long man in their bullpen anymore? I mean, I guess. Who was it last year? Possibly Woodruff at a time for a while?
Yeah, I mean, in September it was Woodruff for sure, but that was, you're right. That was after rosters expanded. So, it's not necessarily a given that you'd have a guy like that in your pen carrying a roster spot starting on opening day either. So Guerra was also that guy for a while last year, but that's only because he struggled with the starting rotation and he had some injuries that he was battling with last year. But, that's another guy that had some success, with the Brewers in the past. In 2016, the guy was lights out. 2017, he was injured on opening day and had some injuries, but came back and pitched fairly well at times. So a guy like Guerra, to me, is a question mark. I do think that there is a role for him in the pen if he wants it, but there's an outside chance he could make the rotation if guys like Davies or Anderson struggle again as well.
Yeah, that's definitely a possibility. I mean, if I had to put money on it now, I'd say that he winds up in middle relief, kind of a little bit of an innings eater, and depending on, I guess, how people pitch, just like you said, within the rotation, he could get bumped up there. Or if he pitches really well and we continue to have issues with injuries in the bullpen, then he could have a little bit more significant role there. So it's really just going to come down to how he pitches, and he'll get a more significant role if he pitches well.
Yeah. So, I mean, at the end of the day, the rotation, again, has a lot of question marks. It's also got a lot of potential, which, is one aspect that doesn't get talked about as much, because Freddie Peralta was a guy that at times was utterly dominant last year. You remember the game against the Rockies. He had an outstanding game against the Cardinals. He's a young guy with a live arm. So, you're talking about guys who've had success in the minor leagues at worst. So I don't necessarily think that the Brewers rotation is as bad as some are saying. But again, a lot of question marks. It's just sort of an unknown factor as to how, maybe 2 or 3, very young pitchers are going to perform, in a potentially playoff caliber rotation.
Yeah, and I mean, just a reminder to folks out there that he was one of 3 basically lottery tickets, Freddie Peralta, that Stearns acquired for Adam Lind. So
that's right. I know our executive producer Craig really hated the Lind trade, but there was a lot to be said for acquiring a guy like Peralta and taking a flyer. During some years that the Brewers were not going to be good anyways. It made a lot of sense looking back at it in retrospect for Stearns to pick up some young pitching like Peralta, and this year it could be very interesting for him. I think that this is really a crucial year for him actually to step into a team in its rotation at the beginning of the year presents a lot of opportunity for a guy like that.
Yeah, and I mean when we picked up Peralta, he was only 19, so I mean it was just really really hard to project, and I think that's. I mean, obviously, if he would have been 21 or 22 or something like that at the time, and maybe, maybe people knew a little bit more about what he was all about. He had more of an established track record. Maybe Stearns isn't able to actually, make that deal happen. But instead, took a flyer on him at a very young age, and so far it's really worked out.
Yeah, no, that's true. Scott, do you see anybody kind of coming out of nowhere to make this team or this roster, or do you think most of the battles are kind of already secured and won? Not counting injuries, but let's look at the roster today, and where do you think that we might see some surprises with the Brewers 25-man roster going into opening day?
Man, I don't know. It seems like every year, like that's always a great question, and this year more than ever, I feel like. Things are pretty well solidified that I don't necessarily see some dark horse coming out and being able to make it. I mean, it seems like anybody at this point, I mean, what's the closest thing to a dark horse? Maybe Spangenberg?
Right. Yeah, like if I had to handicap it, I would say that there's a battle between Saladino and Spangenberg to a degree.
Yep.
Yeah, I mean, this is just me talking. But I think that those two are kind of in a battle for a roster spot. I do think that Ben Gamel makes the team. I think Thames obviously makes the team, even though he wasn't on the postseason roster. I guess the question becomes, do you go with a 12-man pitching staff or a 13-man pitching staff as in some other years? I think the Brewers end up with 12 guys on the pitching staff, and then Hernan Perez makes it again as the kind of utility man guy who can play a ton of different positions. But again, I can't remember a team in recent Brewers history, at least, that has had so few question marks going into opening day. It just seems like not losing anybody really outside of some of our trade deadline acquisitions. It seems like the Brewers are more set in terms of roster construction in 2019 than in any year in recent memory.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I kind of think that he's going to make the roster, but I guess if we want to talk dark horse, maybe Jake Patrica. I mean, he's had a good spring so far, but I guess I kind of thought he was sort of a fringe whether or not he was going to make it, and so far he hasn't done anything to get himself off the roster. So hopefully. Maybe he'll be the dark horse. Right,
and we think that Claudio, I think, is a lock to make the team as a lefty out of the bullpen. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I think we definitely need a situational lefty back there. I mean, I know Hader's lefty, but he's not a loogie, so.
Right, yeah, and Claudio's got the big league track record as well. So yeah, I think Claudio's a lock. I think one other interesting positional battle is going to be a catcher. So we've got, Grandal obviously was our big free agent acquisition in the offseason. We've still got Manny Pena and Eric Kratz. And obviously, most pundits would say that Manny Pena is going to be the guy to be the backup catcher. Do you see any possibility for Eric Kratz to make this team? And, if not, I guess, what do you think that, it lies in Kratz's future?
I don't see us carrying 3 catchers, so let's just start with that. And then I think that the only way that Kratz makes this team is injury or if we traded Pena. The other thing, when you mentioned Thames before, I think that Thames and Pena are the 2 most likely, I guess, bigger name candidates to be traded before opening day. And, so I think that's the only way that Kratz makes the roster. And if he doesn't, I don't know that Kratz – I mean, at this point, he's, 40? Something like that. So I don't know that if we're not going to give him a shot and somebody wants him in the majors, I think it's probably the right thing to do, even if you trade him for next to nothing, which is essentially what the Yankees did for us last year with him. So I don't know. I guess I would say that might be an option. Otherwise, he's proven to be like just a real class act and knows his stuff. I wouldn't be surprised if he I mean, I'd love to see him coaching somewhere within the Brewers organization if that's something that he wanted to do. But it seems like, he still has some baseball left in him. And hopefully he'll be able to play in the majors somehow with the Brewers. I just don't see how it's going to happen this year. And this might be his last run.
Yeah, and I think that given his contractual status, that he would have to actually accept a minor league contract or a minor league assignment. So I don't necessarily know how logical that is either. I had at one point, within the last week after the Royals, Salvador Perez was injured, thought maybe he could be a trade chip to Kansas City, but then they ended up signing former Brewer Martin Maldonado. So I don't know that that's necessarily a destination, but there still is a few weeks of spring training left. There's definitely a possibility for injuries, especially at the catcher position, or maybe Kratz does get a chance to go down to AAA with the Brewers, and then does what happened last year, which is he gets called up and he's sick after injuries, or other guys like Jet Bandy didn't play well last year. He took advantage of his opportunity.
Fitz, is everything okay there? I was a little worried. I don't know.
I didn't know that you could hear that. I'm actually talking to you from the rooftop deck of my apartment complex, and it's overlooking Nat Stadium, which for those of you that know Washington D.C. know that it's now a good neighborhood, but it's on the way to some not so good neighborhoods. So there are some sirens occasionally. So sorry about that, listeners in West Allis and around the state of Wisconsin. Apologies.
No, that's okay. We were just worried about, cumulatively, we were all worried about your safety, and I'm glad to hear that, that the sirens have nothing to do with any of your actions.
I tried to hit the mute button, but it did not happen in time for me to finish my sentence. So sorry about that.
No, I thought it'd be better if I just called it out. I thought it'd be funnier anyway. Actually,
yeah,
I don't know if you can hear it, but
really
the alarm over here went off about 2 minutes before that. So I don't know if the.
Well, that's good. And Scott, you still have to come out and visit Washington D.C. by the way for the maybe the Brewers Nat series in August would be a potential fit.
It's definitely a possibility. I know we've been talking about some other potential things that might happen. Try to see what we could do that's, going to benefit our fans the most. I don't know. It sounds like we unfortunately did not get field or dugout passes for spring training this year. We were actually also hoping to get a little bit of a tour of the new facilities in Maryvale, which unfortunately did not happen either. But, we have taken a hiatus, so it's going to take a little bit to get our popularity back. So I'm sure eventually they'll come crawling back asking us to give them some free press.
It's either that or we did not take a long enough hiatus. I know that there were some concerns with your drinking in the press box in Nashville during the Nashville Sounds days for the Brewers. There was also some issues with Chad in the locker room with a number of things actually. So I don't know if the Brewers still remember that, but it may be prohibiting us from ever getting press passes actually. So it is what it is.
We should see if Craig can put up the Hideki Matsui interview. I think that was a really good interview by Chad. That although that may have been one of the reasons why, unfortunately, we did not get our passes back. But we'll see.
It's we would get them in Japan, and it was a Whammy award-winning interview at the end of the day. So it's nothing that we should be ashamed of. But
yeah, absolutely.
We also may want to call. Did you talk to our anonymous source, Tom Carter, about the press pass issue?
Oh, I did not. I did text him, and he just wrote, I don't know if he accidentally was hitting the wrong two buttons or something like that, but or if he had some kind of a problem with his phone, because all I got was, I don't know if it was like 1010. It was something, but it looked like, or like LOLOLOLO, something like that. I don't know, but whatever it was, I don't know if there was an issue with his phone or what. Also, I think, I don't know why this never occurred to me. First, Tom Carter, he has said that he doesn't. He wants to be our anonymous source, but he wants to be anonymous also. So we shouldn't say his name. Huh. But I just thought of this. Like, this is a podcast. It's not like, it's not live. We're taping it. So we'll just have Craig edit it out every week. So, Craig, you're going to hear this. Right. Just edit out Tom Carter's name, and we're good.
Yeah, you can call him Tom C. or T. Carter. Just kind of bleep it out like we do when Craig swears too much, and then that should be fine. So if you say Tom Carter, just expect that in the podcast it'll be Tom C. or T. Carter, but not Tom Carter because he's anonymous. That makes sense. Yeah, I get it.
Yeah, and I mean, obviously, we go through these episodes with a fine-tooth comb as far as editing, so it should be very easy, quick fix.
So Scott, what are you? yeah. Let's transition now away from our anonymous source, Tom Carter, and talk about 2019 a little bit more. What are you most excited about for the Brewers in 2019? What are you looking forward to, or even what are some of your concerns?
I'm really looking forward to winning the division in 162 games. That's kind of a good thing. But as far as concerns, I guess I'm worried that we did go through a spell. I want to say it was in kind of the end of July, early August, where the team got in a little bit of a funk, and Hader and Jeffers went through like a 2-week stretch where they were very sparingly used. And I guess I just feel like if our starting rotation this year doesn't get to the bullpen with the lead, like if we don't have the lead in the 5th inning, we're not bringing out any of the big guns in our bullpen, and we're probably going to lose. So we did such a great job of playing with the lead, even if it was just a 1-run lead, going into the 5th, 6th inning, that it just made everything kind of come together for this team, and we were able to lock those down as wins. We had just a great job with 1-run victories last year. But, if they're not able to do that this year, then, guys like Hader aren't going to be used as much, and that's not a good thing. Anytime some of your best players aren't used a lot, it's never good.
No, you're right on, and we have to hope that a lot of things go right. I do think the addition of Grandal is going to be big for this team. I know that we've talked about it a bit on previous podcasts, but this is a guy that is definitely one of the best catchers in the National League. So I do think that adding him to the team makes a pretty big difference. And we didn't see a ton of production out of our catching position last year between Pena and Kratz and Bandy and Nottingham. And I do think that stability at that position, barring injury, is going to be a pretty big difference maker for the team this year. And just adds another, kind of cog in our lineup that is far from a guaranteed out. In fact, it's quite the reverse. He's a guy that you expect is going to be able to hit, at least 250, 260 with a ton of power for the position.
Yeah, I just realized when I finished, talking that, you said, like, what did I look forward to? And I is this like Brewer fan mentality here? Like, I started off so positive, and then I ended like, oh, by the way, everything could fall apart like a house of cards. Like, I don't know. Like,
I think I was banned from that site a while ago, so I don't really know, but I think Craig still posts under an assumed name. So I don't. You have to ask Craig.
Well, I don't know. I just, like, it seemed like I was started off so positive, and then it just, fell apart so quickly. And it was like, well, wait a second. No, you asked me what could be positive? Like, okay, so the things that I'm really looking forward to, I want to see how Christian Yelich responds from his MVP season. Like, is he going to be able to replicate something like that? I mean, it's going to be very difficult, but I think if anyone could do it, he can. So to be able to see something like that, I want to see if Keston Hiura is a part of this team this year, and if he plays an integral role at second base. I want to see if Corey Ray. I don't think he's going to do anything for the 2019 Major League team, but this was a guy who struggled so far at just about every level, and then he had a phenomenal year last year. I'm going to see if he could do that again. And is he going to wind up being maybe in a Brewer uniform in 2020, or is he going to be somebody that we trade, at the deadline this year for maybe the last piece of the puzzle for a championship run? I don't know. I mean, there's so many things to look forward to. Seeing Josh Hader come out again out of the bullpen. Hopefully seeing a totally healthy Jeremy Jeffers come out and lock it down. I mean, his season was so dominant last year. Seeing hopefully a full season of Corey Knebel being dominant again. There's so many things that it's time for baseball again, and I'm really happy that we're almost there.
Yeah, no, I'm with you 100%, and I'm excited for those things too. I do think that Corey Ray may be a September call-up, if not before, but if he's called up before, that probably means that there's an injury, so that wouldn't necessarily be a good thing. But I certainly think that we might see Hiura and Dubon and Corey Ray and maybe Tyrone Taylor and guys like that up in the big leagues at some point in 2019 as well. But, yeah, Scott, I'm with you on all those factors. I'm excited to see again, Grandal in a Brewers uniform. I'm excited to see if Aguilar can repeat some of his success from last year, especially in the first half. I'm excited to see Lorenzo Cain have another great year in the Brewers outfield. Excited to see in a weird way what Ben Gamel can do. And I know he's not a guy that we're necessarily talking about a lot, but I do think that he brings a different type of game to the Brewers outfield picture, a guy who plays great defense, a guy who's got a cannon for an arm, a guy who gets on base a lot. Kind of excited for that. I think that there's a lot of things to be excited about. Mike Moustakas being with the Brewers from opening day on, I think is exciting. I do think that you're going to see his numbers at Miller Park kind of reflect the fact that it's a left-handed hitter's park. Being with the team for a full year will allow him to do that. I'm excited to see Travis Shaw continue to be one of the best third basemen in the National League. So I think there's a lot of excitement. And the other guy that we haven't really talked about much is Orlando Arcia. I think that Arcia had an off year last year offensively for sure. He was sent down to the minor leagues, I think twice during the year. But Arcia is a guy that to me has been, incredibly solid defensively, obviously. But I think he can make some strides this year with the bat. And boy, if he steps up and can hit even just decently in that number 8 spot in the lineup, we are talking about a lineup that 1 through 8 is really incredibly tough.
Yep, you read my mind. I actually was going to say, which Orlando Arcia are we going to see? 2017 or 2018 or playoff 2018? Right.
Right. And we as fans can, forget how young he still is. I mean, this is a guy that was called up at an incredibly young age around the deadline in 2016. And, so now he's got a couple of years of experience in the major leagues. He's got, just a ton of talent. I just think that Arcia is a guy that a lot of people are forgetting that can still be a big part of the 2019 club.
Any chance that Mauricio Dubon plays for the Brewers this year? I think, again, it would bear an injury. That might be the only way, but I don't know. Well, I guess that's another one.
Well, Dubon is a guy who's also exciting. Now, going back to 2018, I know we talked about this on the podcast, but Dubon was about to get called up. He was ready for his promotion. Yeah. Arcia wasn't playing well, and Saladino had just been sent down. I think that Dubon was literally like a day or 2 days away from the major leagues, given the struggles at the major league level of Orlando Arcia. So I think that Dubon is certainly, if not in the major leagues to start the year, probably the first guy that's called up, depending on the Saladino-Spangenberg situation. in the infield. So Dubon, I think, definitely is in the mix. He will be up with the team at some point in 2019. He's recovered from his injury, apparently. He missed part of spring training this year with some viral intestinal infection, which was not related, obviously, to hospitalized for like 4 or 5 days. But, he seems to have recovered from that, and it's not something that has anything to do with his injury from last season. So, I think that Dubon is now healthy, reporting for duty, ready to play. And I think that there's enough hype surrounding him, and he had such a great year last year until his injury that he will probably be up in the majors, I would guess, at some point in the first couple of months of the year. And, there's always injuries. So you expect that he's going to be called up for one reason or another, whether it's lack of production or an injury at some point.
Is it
probably
fair
in a couple months?
Is it fair to say that right now, just because of his injuries and not having a lot of playing time, do you think that he is now, I guess, behind Arcia, Spangenberg, and Saladino, all three of those guys on the depth chart?
No, I don't, because Dubon has a ton of talent. He was viewed as a prospect even when the Brewers acquired him from Boston in the Travis Shaw trade for Tyler Thornburg. So I think that given his pedigree, I would say that Dubon is a guy that will not only see some playing time with the Brewers, but could easily jump ahead of a guy like a Saladino for sure, and maybe a Spangenberg. Guys like Saladino and Spangenberg, with all due respect to them, and they are, good ball players, but they're not guys that you are counting on necessarily to be a part of your future. They're good role players. They've got a role with the team or the organization in some capacity. They can definitely provide some valuable moments for a team, but you're not looking at 2022, for instance, and saying Tyler Saladino is probably going to be with the team still. I don't think that that's in anybody's mind at this point. So a guy like Dubon, you can't say that about. I think Dubon is young enough and he's talented enough that he is part of the Brewers' conversations for future years going forward. So that automatically, to me, puts him a little bit above those guys on the depth chart. If not for this year, then at some point soon.
Yeah, that's a fair assessment. Although I thought I don't know why, but I always thought that Hernan Perez, I always thought it's great that he could play a lot of positions, but he doesn't really wow me anywhere. So I'm not sure if what he has as far as a role in this team, but he's really excelled in that super sub role, and sure enough, he's starting every Sunday. So I don't know.
It is kind of crazy. Outside of Ryan Braun, I believe that Hernan Perez is now the longest tenured Milwaukee Brewer. Isn't that crazy?
It's crazy, yeah.
Or at least Brewer position player. There may be a pitcher or two that's ahead of him, but outside of Ryan Braun, I believe he's the longest tenured Brewer. He was with the team in 2014. So yeah, crazy to think about.
Yeah. So do you think that we're going to have, I don't know if you remember last year's spring training, all the hype surrounding G-Man Choi, who was then traded, where did we trade him to, the Rays?
The Rays for Brad Miller last year.
Oh, yeah, that was great. That was awesome. All the highlights Brad Miller gave us. But
I think he had a base hit once. That was cool.
Maybe. I don't know. Probably. Yeah, get enough at bats, I guess. But, no, I'm not trying to, bag on Brad Miller. But I was actually, where I was going with this was, do you see any guy like that? I think that Thames is probably the obvious candidate for this, potentially, as a guy that winds up, the numbers don't wind up working out, and he winds up being, left off the roster. So instead, we wind up trading him for something that we could actually use. Do you see anybody getting traded before opening day?
Well, I don't know. Thames is a hard case because he's making, $7-point-something million this year. So for us to trade him, we'd either have to eat part of his salary, or a team is going to have to accept that full amount, which is a lot for a team at this point in the offseason to add for a guy who's not necessarily an all-star. So but here's the thing. I think that Eric Thames still has a ton of value for this team. And I wouldn't just trade him for anything. I would only trade him for some value, and I'm not just talking salary relief. I think that Thames has got, left-handed power. If it's off the bench, that's fine. But to have him come up as a late-inning threat off the bench, to me, the bench has been one of the most overlooked reasons for the Brewers' success and one of the reasons for the Brewers' failure in other years. When we don't have a strong bench, we don't have a strong team. So I think that we really need a guy like Thames or a left-handed power threat to be able to come up off the bench late in games to strike the fear of God in opposing bullpen. So I like Thames as a Brewer. I don't think that the salary is prohibitive for the Brewers. I think it would be a lot, though, for another team to take on, though, at this point.
Yeah, I can't really think. I mean, I guess Thames would be the obvious candidate, or obviously Kratz, but we've already talked about that. So, yeah, I guess he's the only other one that I can think of off the top of my head.
Yeah, I mean, unless you're going to deal from some of the Brewers starting pitching depth for something of more value, but I don't know what that is at this point. So, I think that if there's going to be another addition for the Brewers, that's a meaningful addition. Maybe it's a guy like Kimbrel, but I don't know if we're maxed out payroll-wise. I don't think there's any way for us to know, unless you're Mark Atanasio. I don't know if anyone knows. But I do think that the Brewers are also very creative. We saw that with Stearns last year when on opening day he decided to take, what was it, 3, 4 first baseman, Eric Thames, Jesus Aguiar, Ji-Man Choi. I mean, we are not necessarily privy to what Stearns is thinking, and he surprised everybody last year with his opening day roster management.
Yeah, that's definitely true. And like you said, the bench, we've always said that our depth was not typically there in past years, and the bench was so important last year. And our depth last year, I thought, was possibly could have been the deepest Brewer team ever. That's not.
Oh yeah, definitely. I mean, look at it in September. I know that's after rosters expand, but when you had Domingo Santana and Keon Broxton and Curtis Granderson on your bench, I mean, that was an incredible bench to have, and Eric Thames for that matter. So I think that the Brewers are likely to try to carry that depth as much as possible, which is why I don't think that they're necessarily going to trade Thames. Could be wrong. If it's the right deal, you trade anybody. But I think that they're going to try to maintain that depth, and I think that if we are, as expected, in contention at the deadline, that's probably an area where we're going to see Stearns add on again, come July 31st, like we did, or August 31st, like we did last year with Granderson and some of those guys.
Yeah, and when your entire starting rotation is typically only going, 5 to 6 innings, then that leaves, that depth even more important from whether it be like double switches or pinch hitting for the pitcher spot or whatever it may be. That depth is super important. And so,
and more so for a team like Milwaukee, like you pointed out, more so for a team like Milwaukee than a team that has, an incredibly strong starting rotation, or an American League team for that matter. So I think that's, one of the big differences with the Brewers, and David Stearns is cognizant of that. If you're not going to go spend the money on a Dallas Keuchel, or you're not going to go trade for, pick your starting rotation or starting pitcher that was available last year at the deadline, you're going to have other ways to make up for that, which is a strong bullpen and a strong bench. So you've seen Stearns through his actions say that that's where he can find value for a team with the Brewers' budget constraints, and that's what he's acted on. And I think that you're going to continue to see that model because, well, quite frankly, it's worked. So until we can find value in acquiring a starter for what Stearns is comfortable paying, either monetarily or in terms of talent in a trade, that's probably going to be the model that's going to be replicated year in and year out in Milwaukee.
Yeah, and I know that even last year I was talking about, there's, if you really want to get some kind of a proven ace for a team that's looking to deal one, I always thought Madison Bumgarner was a good pick for that. And then I saw, I think it was last month, there was an article where it was like him quoting about what baseball, how it's shifting now between, instead of starters, they're openers, and they're, expected to pitch less, and, they're going to come out and take the ball sooner. And he was like, nope, that's not
right.
I'm like, well, you're probably not going to fit in Milwaukee then.
Right. And what's the term that I think Sophia Minarts and others have used is initial outgetters for starting pitchers. I mean, it's going to take a while, I think, for the fans to kind of come to terms with that reality, that the Brewers are truly doing things different. And what we don't know is if this is a long-term organizational philosophy that Stearns is trying to implement, or if he's just kind of dealing with the cards that he's dealt in a particular season or two. But I do think that Stearns has been very public about saying that he's going to look for value, and he's going to look for ways to capitalize on the Brewers financial situation. So that includes looking at ways to maybe add to the bullpen instead of the starting rotation, and That's probably the model that we're going to continue to see in 2019, given the Brewers. I won't even say budget constraints, but just the way that the league values starting pitching right now.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely true. And actually, I'm going to throw something out there totally out of the blue, I guess. When we talk about initial out-getters or openers or whatever you want to call it, when we threw Wade Miley out there in the playoffs to face exactly one batter, knowing that he was going to get pulled after that, but then that we could, bring on somebody else. And that way, obviously the Dodgers aren't able to put out their best lineup for, for the starter that they're facing because the starter's only facing one batter. I think that in years past, that'd be called kind of Bush League. And I guess I wanted to know what your take is on it. I know we're really talking about a hot topic here when it was 6 months ago, but still wanted to know your take on it.
I mean, Bush League, I think, is maybe a little overused as a term. You know what? I mean, if you're a team, you're looking to win, you got to use every means that you can to win. So, I guess first of all, I don't know if it's Bush League, but number two, I guess I don't really care. I mean, if it's a strategy that works, why wouldn't you use whatever you can to win to your advantage? And, if I'm the Brewers and I'm looking at a team like the Dodgers who have a very deep starting rotation, I would look for ways to counter that a bit, which if you have to make, a pitching change after one batter just to mess with their lineup and mess with their heads a little bit, then so be it. I mean, baseball is a game that throughout the years has always been used, in certain ways by certain teams. There's nothing written in stone that says that a team has to do anything. There's been countless examples over the years of teams trying to gain little petty advantages over other teams, and I don't think that that's going to change anytime soon. So this is just the latest iteration of that. So whether it's starting a guy who throws a spitball or using a knuckleballer or using something that just because it hasn't been tried doesn't mean that it's wrong. So I'm not opposed to trying it. I think that it's worth a shot, especially given what the Brewers faced last year in the playoffs. So I think anything you can do to win is up for grabs. Yeah,
no, I agree. I think when it first happened, I wasn't like, oh, that was brilliant. Instead, my reaction was like, yeah, I don't know how I feel about that.
well, yeah. I mean, yeah.
I guess as time comes around, I guess I would equate it to, like you said, there's so many other little advantages that people do. Like, I mean, this is the exact same thing as, positioning your outfield to a no double or no doubles defense, or the shift that they typically put on lefties now because they're all pull, or, I mean, if even to a lesser extent, celebrating a home run was considered showboating, and now like it's encouraged. So, I mean, at the end of the day, yeah, it's just the evolution of the game, and it's trying to get an advantage any way you can. And the game is one big chess match, and you got to make your move.
Yeah, and one other point with that too, Scott, is that I think that maybe if the roles were reversed, it wouldn't be as big of a deal. But because Milwaukee isn't necessarily the Dodgers or the Yankees, you're going to get more flack for it. I think that there's probably been, other examples that I wasn't even thinking of throughout, again, baseball history that will show that teams will do anything that they can to sort of increase their advantage. And I don't think the Brewers doing that last year was a bad thing. I think that, again, Stearns was kind of using the cards that he was dealt, and it's not necessarily something that we're going to repeat either. It's, something that maybe you do in 2018 and 2019, but not in 2020. And maybe other teams will adjust to it even. So I'm not too worried about it. I think that there'll probably be other things that we see over the course of a guy like David Stearns' tenure in Milwaukee that others might call into question. But I don't think, again, that you give up anything that you can do to win. I think that you have to take if you're a team like the Brewers.
Yeah, I mean, it's not like we did something that was outside of the rules of the game, like, I don't know, hack other organizations' websites to try to steal their information.
Right.
I mean, it's not like we did anything like that. That would,
right. I mean, that wouldn't be very
historic organization of the league, the Cardinals.
I was going to say that would be very classy, would it? But
sure how the baseball gods felt about that one.
Well, and here's the thing, though. I will say this. I don't think that the Brewers can rely on necessarily that same battle plan or blueprint for every season. Again, I think that they've got to realize that maybe 2018 was sort of its own thing and then go with something else in future years. So I don't necessarily think that it's going to be something that the Brewers can do all the time. I think that you've got to mix and match, your circumstances for the year. You can't necessarily go into it with the same battle plan. Every year is different, and every year presents its own unique challenges. And I think the Brewers are going to have to react to that to a degree.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And I mean, even now, there were only a handful of teams. That I could think of: Brewers, Rays, maybe the A's, that really, started doing this kind of openers thing. And now it's, you just feel like, it's a copycat league, and it's going to get a little bit more prevalent each year, and you just have to do what you can to stay ahead of the curve. And the only reason why I make fun of the Cardinals, by the way, well, I guess there's two. One is because we play a 4-game series with them to start off the season, and two is because I hate the Cardinals.
Yeah, and they totally deserve it. Yeah, definitely. And just one quick follow-up point. So I think that there's a you can't, if you're David Stearns, you cannot rely on that every year, and it's just because the starting rotation of your team can't be overlooked either. So that's the one caveat I throw out there. You can't just say starting pitching isn't important, because starting pitching is really important. So you have to look for ways to always buttress that starting pitching depth. And I think a lot of fans recognize that, which is why you hear a lot of people saying, sign Keuchel or get a starter somehow. Because any depth that we can add in that rotation makes it less necessary to do stuff like that, or, at least put less wear and tear on the bullpen. That being said, again, come back down to the fact that you do what you can with what you got. So, so that's my opinion on that.
Yeah, I'd love an ace. That would be great. They go for about, 25 to 30 million a year.
Right.
So.
Right. Exactly. So that means no Grandal, and that means, no pay raises for guys, or no Moustakas, or right. Exactly. So,
so there goes all your depth. The one thing that we said,
and no depth. And then, and certainly eliminates any, deadline acquisitions, which, every fan is going to want to do come July. So, last year we saw the Brewers incredibly active at the deadline. We got Scope, we got Moustakas, we got Cedeno, we got Gonzalez, we got Granderson, we got all these guys that, were able to come in because the Brewers could be a little bit flexible with their payroll. But again, if you lock all that money into one player or in one position, you're not going to be able to do that.
Craig said, by the way, that we should never mention Scope's name again unless we're doing another Hall of Shame episode. So,
well,
throw that out there.
I'm glad we signed Moustakas, because I was a little fearful that the Brewers' second baseman were not going to be able to match Scope's output this year with the Twins. So that's fine. We can abide by the Craig rule on that. Although I will just say, as an official caveat on the air, that he was still better than Dozier.
Yeah, they were not good, but I don't know. What do you think?
Neither one of them were good.
Second, I don't know.
That's kind of an interesting one. We talked about Shaw moving to second at one point last season, and now it's Moustakas. I think that Shaw has got a really good defensive ability at third base, so I can see why the Brewers are doing this. Moustakas isn't necessarily going to be the most fleet-footed of second basemen, but that being said, you make up for that a little bit. Number one, because of the shift, and number two, because I think Shaw is that good at third base defensively that you want to pencil him in every day as your third baseman. Not that Moustakas is bad. In fact, I'd say that Moustakas is above average, and I think defensive matrix bear that out. But I do think that Shaw is excellent at playing a defensive third base, and so that's why you keep him there. And if you can add a guy like Moustakas' bat to the lineup every day from opening day until the last game of the year, at a place especially like Miller Park, that is a huge benefit, and the defense will, in some weird ways, take care of itself. And I think it's also helped tremendously by having a guy like Orlando Arcia at shortstop who can cover a lot of territory. So that takes away some of the pressure, I think, on who's ever playing second base.
Yeah, and I think second base is one of those positions in baseball that, it used to be like a wildly athletic position. And, at the end of the day, the way the league is now, they'd rather see Mike Moustakas there than Jim Gantner. I mean, that's just the way it is.
Right.
Gantner could do more for you, I guess obviously defensively, but Mike Moustakas will hit more home runs in one game than Gantner will in 3 years. So that's what they want.
Exactly. No, exactly. And I think that, kind of like what we were saying with the pitching, the Brewers are going to have to look at, their home ballpark and their own team's factors rather than just what is even league average on stuff. And I think that Moustakas' bat again plays so well in Miller Park that you got to find a way to get that guy in the lineup. And Shaw played a pretty decent second base last year, but again, with his value being so high at third base as a defender, I think that you keep him there and you move Moustakas. And you know that if it doesn't work out, you do have the option to at some point move Shaw if it's really that bad for Moustakas to play second.
Yeah, no, that's true. And I think it'll work out fine. I mean, it's just another way of thinking. I don't know. Didn't this happen in Moneyball? I don't know.
Yeah, Scott Hatteberg playing at first base after being a catcher for like 8 years. Yeah, no, exactly. It's interesting. We're trying a lot of new things in Milwaukee, and we, for good or for bad, we're kind of raised in the Doug Melvin. Prior to that, Dean Taylor. Prior to that, Sal Bando school of Brewers GMs that didn't really experiment a ton, and now we've got David Stearns who's experimenting all the time with different ways to improve the club. But I think that there's good and bad with that. But I think that obviously the results have spoken for themselves in some ways.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I don't know. We've been talking people's ear off for a while now, but, we're getting close to opening day, so I know people are excited for it, so we try to make this episode a little bit longer. Anything else you wanted to cover?
Well, no, Scott, I feel like we're pretty good. It's just what are you going to eat on opening day, and what time should I meet you in the Miller Park parking lot? I will be there.
Unfortunately, I will not be there, but I did.
Actually, I got an extra ticket. I actually literally have an extra ticket, so I'm assuming you're gonna be there.
Well, I did take off work, and there's probably a 50-50 chance I'll be unemployed by then. So I guess we'll have to play it by ear.
Yeah, that means you got plenty of time. You don't even have to ask for an off day. It's perfect. Just hop on a flight to Milwaukee. We'll send our intern to pick you up at the airport, and you'll be all set, man. I'll see you in Molitor 4.
Yeah, stuff just in case. I guess we'll have to leave that as a cliffhanger and to be continued. Stay tuned to figure out if I go.
Stay tuned. And Scott, we did talk people's ears off, but we didn't get a chance to respond to our growing list of email questions. So sorry about that, folks, but please continue to send in your questions. I promise we'll get to them soon. Brew Crew Review Podcast with an S at gmail.com is our email address. And continue to follow us on Twitter. We've got a lot of great banter going on every day with our followers and other fans on Twitter. Brew Crew Review 1 on Twitter.
Awesome. Great job, Vince.
Yeah, no, thank you, Scott. Glad you could join us tonight. Hopefully next week we get our hosts, Craig and Chad, back on the set with us. I'd like to thank our interns, Michelle and Clarissa, and our anonymous source, Tom Carter, and our longtime Twitter supporter, Vikram, for all their support for this show. So I guess that we can wrap this up here. Scott, any parting words for the fans?
No, just, we kind of started this thing because we were friends and we just liked, talking about the Brewers. We all worked, with the Brewers organization, and we all became friends through that. It was just a common bond. And, at the end of the day, like, any Brewer fan is a friend of mine. And so it's just so fun to be able to share this, on Twitter and YouTube and everywhere else, and be able to share that just all these fun memories. And I mean, what a great season we had last year. It's great to be a part of it. And it's, if you're listening or on Twitter or whatever you're doing, share this with your other Brewer friends, and we could obviously always use more of you.
Yeah, absolutely. Well said, Scott. And we're looking forward to coming at you, on a weekly basis here going forward throughout the season. And actually, before the opening day episode, we will have one more interview episode. We are going to be talking to former Brewers pitcher Jason DeRocher in our next podcast. So stay tuned for that. stay tuned for our opening day preview coming up before the Brewers take on the Cardinals on March 28th in Milwaukee at beautiful Miller Park. And get your grills ready, Wisconsin. Despite the winter, we're close to spring and better weather and baseball again. Thank God.
Yep, we're almost there. There's a light at the end of the tunnel. So make sure to
All right.
And stay classy.
Stay classy, Milwaukee. We'll talk to you soon. Go Brewers.
Go Brewers.